So I trained with Dr. Tessier from 1985 through 1986 in Paris, and I was interested in his work because he was a real pioneer in surgery of the face and skull. And there were very, very specific things that he developed, including access. When you're going to take apart or put back together somebody's face, you have to be able to access the bones underneath, because the foundation of all the appearance is the bones. So how do you get to the bones in somebody's face? Where do you make the incision so the scar will hide and it will still give you access? And this was one of the areas that he was an absolute pioneer. And the second thing that was important was his development of surgical instruments. Now that we know where to make the incision and how to get to all the different bones that hold the face together, what instruments do we have that allow us to do that safely and properly? And so he was a real force in designing and working with instrument companies to develop a specific set of instruments to be able to take the face apart and put it back together again. And the third thing, which was critical and which came later in his life, was the development of imaging. Because if you can't see what you're trying to fix, then how are you going to get it back in the right place? If you can't see the deformity, how are you going to make a correction? So access, instrumentation, and imaging.
So when did you first hear about this crazy guy in Paris doing all this stuff? And then when did you first meet him?
So I first heard about this when I was in general surgery, probably in about my fourth year. And one of the other general surgeons had read something sort of off scope in the plastic surgery literature about this guy, Paul Tessier, and the amazing things that he did. And what I was hearing from him was so unbelievable that I had to track it down and find out what that was all about. I was in the process of applying for plastic surgery residency in Kansas City, and I did get accepted. And once I went there, I discovered that this guy who did all these incredible things was a regular visitor on an annual basis, and he would come to Kansas City and select his cases and operate. And so it turned out it was serendipity that I was in the right place at the right time with the right guy. And I spent a couple of weeks every year for 4 years operating with him, first as first-year resident, second-year resident, faculty, and then second year had to wait a year to get into the fellowship. And just like Doug, I was the guy from the entire world that was picked for that year. Same for you. And so I had, the slot was already full for the year that I wanted, so I had to work for a year before I could go over there, which was a good thing because I saved my money and then I could afford a little bit of Paris. So that's how that all started.
So let me ask you, the first time as a plastic surgery fellow, when you scrubbed in with this guy, what were you thinking?
Well, I had no idea. I didn't speak French. And he did, and there was a lot of back chatter in French, but he was an extremely forceful person, personality-wise, and also as a surgeon in the operating room. He did not mess around. And what I learned in the first few cases with him was this really brought everything that I was learning together, because of all of general surgery, all the physiology and respiratory physiology and cardiac physiology, the stress and strain in the early days, these operations were tremendously long and frequently a lot of blood loss. So a lot of physiologic disruption of the patient in order to reconstruct the face. And all of my general surgery training was extremely useful in managing respiration and managing fluid and electrolytes and managing blood transfusions, plus everything that I was learning in plastic surgery about the face and aesthetics and, the various skin operations that were common to plastic surgery at that time. So it was a great coming together, and that's what caused me to go ahead and pursue the fellowship and to get the full formal training.
Like a lot of residents finishing their formal training in plastic surgery, I had planned to spend the following year, which would have been 72, 73, in 3 locations. Part of it was Australia, part of it was Cape Town, Africa, and the third part was going to be in Zurich, Switzerland. And I'd heard about Tessier, but I didn't know much about him. By an accident, when I was a chief resident at Stanford, a person asked me if I was coming to the craniofacial meeting in New York City. And so no, but I went. And the first lecture basically was by the person I was going to spend time with in Zurich, Switzerland. And I sort of didn't seem like he was really excited about seeing me. And I thought, what am I going to that country for all this time? And I can't even talk to the guy. Well, the next lecture was Tessier's. And I thought, that's what I want to do. It was just so overwhelmingly interesting and incredible what he was doing that there wasn't even a second thought. That night there was a cocktail party at the Palace Hotel. I think it's the name of the hotel. It's across the street from Fifth Avenue. From the Central Park on Fifth Avenue. And I kept my eyes on him, and so people sort of got through talking with him. And before he left, I cornered him, introduced myself, and within a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I got the first fellowship with Tessier ever. And it was just fantastic. And I traveled with Tessier after I came back. We operated in Montreal. We operated in Chicago. We operated in Philadelphia, and developed a lifelong friendship with him and with almost all of the guys who trained afterwards, like yourself. Right. And it was fantastic. It was an experience. You almost can't believe what an experience it was. You sort of hit your hand on the head and say, well, how did this happen? It was nothing you planned. It was a why in the road, and why you went on that particular bend is surprising to you sometimes.
I think it's exactly right, and I would absolutely agree. As soon as I saw what he could do and how he did it, I was hooked. Yeah. There was no doubt in my mind that this is what I wanted to do, and I had to go there to learn how to do it.
There was no other place to learn.
There was no other place.
There were 3 or 4 other people in the world that were doing craniofacial surgery, but they didn't have a training program. They had never trained in doing it themselves, and I think really they may have had lots of problems. Tessier had sort of worked out the problems, so complications almost didn't exist.
Well, one of the things that I think set Tessier apart, other than his giant intellect, was his insistence on going and visiting and working with as many experts in as many different fields as he could above the shoulders. So he worked with the neurosurgeons, Viso, and he went with the ophthalmologists, and he went with the stomatologists. In France, they don't have oral surgeons or ENT; they have stomatologists, which is the whole package. And he sort of went with the idea of, like with the ophthalmologists, what can the eyeball tolerate? What can we do to this eyeball? How far can we move it? How hard can we pull on it? How hard can we mash on it without causing permanent damage? And it was that way with all the different structures. And so, Mastardi and his eyelid surgery, all of those different things were studied intentionally by him. And then he put together an approach to access the problem, expose the problem, instrument the problem, make the correction, and put it all back together without causing damage. And that was I think pivotal to his success and his preeminence in the world, was that he made the study. He bothered to learn the basics before he jumped in and started moving faces around.